On the second segment of In Your Interest, we're tracking a developing story that hits right at the heart of the Indian economy and eventually your own wallet. The latest data for April 2026 is out, and the numbers are startling as well. Wholesale inflation, WPI, the price at which factories and bulk traders buy goods, has surged to 8.3%. And to put that in perspective, we were at just 3.88% in March. That's more than doubled. And this isn't just a minor increase. It's the sharpest jump we've seen in nearly 3.5 years, the last 42 months. The primary culprit behind this spike is the rising tension in global crude oil markets due to, of course, the West Asian war. We're already seeing the impact at the pump with fuel prices climbing. However, the ripple effect goes much further, making everything from chemicals and metals to the very clothes on your back more expensive to produce. And while these numbers represent the back end of the economy, the reason they matter to you is simple. When it becomes significantly more expensive to make a product, it inevitably becomes more expensive for you to buy it. As global crude oil prices remain volatile, the cost of importing goods across the country has shot up overnight. And this isn't just a problem for logistical companies, it affects every sector from agriculture to heavy manufacturing. When fuel becomes costlier, the price of delivering vegetables to your local market or raw materials to a factory rises in tandem. Currently, businesses are caught in a difficult position. For months, many have tried to absorb rising costs to keep demand steady, but with wholesale inflation hitting 8.3%, that cushion seems to be disappearing. We're likely to see these input costs being passed down to the end consumer, and this means that the retail inflation you feel at the grocery store or the electronics shop could see a significant uptick in the next and coming months. Furthermore, this surge exposes a long-standing vulnerability: India's heavy dependence on the energy imports. As long as global tensions dictate oil prices, our domestic economy remains at the mercy of international markets. For investors, this creates a climate of uncertainty. The stock market is already reacting to the possibility that the RBI may now choose to keep interest rates high to suck liquidity out of the system and tame these rising prices. But whilst the government and policymakers will look for ways to manage this, what can ordinary citizens really do here? Well, here are 5 practical steps you can take up right now. First up, budget like a warrior. Track every rupee you spend and cut down on things you do not really need. Second, buy smart and buy early. Stock up on groceries and essential items before retail prices start climbing. Number 3, make your money work harder. Consider in equity mutual funds or gold to help your savings grow. Number 4, slash your fuel and utility bills. Try carpooling, use public transport more often, like what the Prime Minister also suggested. The Chief Ministers have followed suit. Today, the Delhi Chief Minister said the same about government officials. And keep your vehicle well serviced. And number 5, create extra income streams. Look at freelancing, a side hustle maybe, or monetizing a skill through part-time work. The big questions, and we've got an exclusive conversation that's coming your way, the big question that we're trying to understand: how long will it take for this 8.3% wholesale surge to fully reflect in the retail prices paid by the average household out there? And with growth targets in the mind, can the Reserve Bank afford to delay interest rate cuts further, or will the fear of runaway inflation force their hand? First up, for an exclusive interview, S.C. Garg, former Finance Secretary, Government of India, joins us on the broadcast here. Many thanks for taking out the time here, Mr. Garg. First and foremost, wholesale inflation has jumped to 8.3%, sir, the highest in over 3 years, last 42 months to be precise. Is this mainly an imported oil shock that we've been talking about? It's the 76th day of the West Asian war. Or does it also expose deeper weaknesses in India's inflation management? Your assessment, your reading, and of course, your word of caution or message to the consumer, the middle class household out there.
So this is the first impact, the first order effect of the global energy crisis, the prices of oil, gas having gone up. Interestingly, wholesale index measures the prices passed on to commercial sector, as you've seen, to restaurants, to airlines, to transport sector and all. So the government has chosen to pass on that price to them, and that is reflected. So if the wholesale price index released now is red, the biggest item where the increase is in the fuel part of it. I think it's about 25%. over there, which translates into overall index of 8.5% or something. Now, the next step would be that the secondary prices increases would kick in. So the restaurants will raise price, the transporters would raise price, the input users will raise price, whether it's in the provision sector or steel, aluminium, anything. So the secondary order effects will start kicking in now. That would get reflected from next month onwards. So this will last because the base year for 1 year fuel prices of last year were low, and therefore the what comes out from the fuel price will stay and the other factors will join. So it's quite likely that the wholesale price index will further worsen as time go along.
All right.
It might go to 10%, 12% or something more. When it comes to retail, the retail is at this moment protected by the government in terms of the fuel prices rise. The government is not passed on. It can't hold on that too very long, as the ministers have started also arguing. So as and when the government raises the fuel prices, the retail or the retail price index will also start reflecting. Wholesaler effect will also come in. So I should suspect that from 1 to 2 months now, the retail prices would also be increasing.
1 to 2 months. That's the timeline you're talking about here. So, sir, but you see, fuel and power inflation, it's exploded from almost 1% to nearly 25% within a span of a month. So what really went wrong here? Is the government reacted too slow to these rising crude prices? And whilst I ask you that, in this current setup and dynamic, to be fair, Mr. Garg, can any government fully insulate consumers from that? Do we have any worldly examples that have been able to do that?
No, in fact, everywhere in the world, the prices have been increased already. The fact that the government of India and through its oil marketing companies decided to hold on to the prices for retail is only India-specific, idiosyncratic action. There is no justification for this. You have to pass on the price. The government and the oil companies cannot absorb it. It was purely for political reasons that this was not done, and also probably an expectation that maybe the war would end soon and the oil prices would come and the gas prices would sort of come down to the normal levels. As it is not happening, the government has no option and no justification to hold on to price increases. It has to be passed on. You see, if you don't pass on, still the economy and the people suffer. If your oil marketing companies run the losses of 1,000 crore to 1,200 crores a day, somebody has to bear it. That the government will provide either in the form of tax concessions as it has done, or pure subsidies. And where those subsidies come from, it's again come from the taxpayers and all. All it does is that instead of sort of making the direct consumers of oil prices, oil and gas consumers, suffer the consequence of higher prices, it gets spread over the economy in general. It doesn't save the consumers. The inflation impact of that would be almost similar to what if you price it to direct, except that the suffering would be more generally spread than the specific ones.
You've given us a pragmatic, idea of what's coming our way, and you've painted a rather grim picture as well. Of course, that's the, cards that we've been dealt with at this point in time. How worried should the common middle class household really be tonight, and what's your message to them? We earlier put out those 5 ways to protect your pocket. Would you like to add any of those? Would you like to, rebuke any of those points here?
See, the consumers have to sort of cope with the situation. They have no option. They're living. They are the people who suffer the price effect, right? And it becomes more complicated in Indian situation because 80% to 85% of our households are not inflation protected. It's only about 15 to 16% of the households who are inflation protected. So if they have no increase in incomes to take care of the inflation impact, they have to manage with lesser incomes. And therefore, the consumers have to sort of tighten their belt. There is no option. They have to reduce consumption. Many of them resort to taking loans during this time, borrowing very high cost. I don't think it should be done. It's better to sort of consume less than take extra high interest loans and suffer much more in times to come. Please don't do that. That is, if you can persuade the government to sort of keep your subsidies a little higher during this period of time, I think that is helpful. But borrowing your way at high interest would be crippling and would be very bad. There is no option except tightening your belt.
Well, a final couple of questions here, Mr. Garg. You see, critics say that our country remains dangerously dependent on imported energy. Of course, this is, an epiphany that's come to light. Everybody's talking about it, given with what's happening at the oil choke points of the world. Is this a fair criticism, or do you think it's unrealistic, given the size of our economy, given the size of our demography?
No, we are actually looking at excuses. Iran, US war is a manifestation of our very long, vulnerable positions on energy. We have not used any of the good policy options for last 20-25 years. See, the gas, the only very good way of getting the gas reliably to India is through pipelines. But the pipelines have to pass through Pakistan, whether it's from Turkmenistan or Iran or elsewhere. And we have created a situation where we can't do business with Pakistan, so you suffer. We have, even on Nepalese side, the big hydro potential which Nepal sits on, many times more than what the Bhutan potential has been utilized, is for hydro in Nepal, but we have allowed it to lapse. We have not used it. The solar and the wind option is where the world has actually solved much of the dependence on the oil. Look at the Chinese, the way they have done. But we have again not invested in technologies and investment on the solar and on that side. Our investment is much less. Likewise, electrical vehicles et al. Yep. So we have mismanaged our energy economy. There is no doubt about it. There are no short-term solutions. Unless we address, if we can use this opportunity or this occasion to think 20 years from now and take all those steps which are required to reduce our dependence on this way of transportation of oil or import of solar cells and modules from China, I think that is the way. You can't solve it in months or even 1 or 2 years.
Okay. I'm being told that Mitali Nikore, founder and chief economist, Nikore Associates, is with us on the broadcast as well. But, before we let you go, Mr. Garg, my final question to you. The government numbers, they say they're relatively, contained from 1.85% to just 2.31. The government is certainly going to argue that food inflation is still relatively controlled and that the economy remains resilient. Are we, and here's my question, are we overreacting to just 1 month's data?
No, the food inflation is benign at this moment because the food economy is good. We have cereals production, we have vegetables production. But remember, this is a cyclical thing. Vegetables problem 1.5 years back was very terrible. Inflation was coming into the vegetables, through vegetables economy much higher. Last year was a very, very good year, which has kept for last about 12 to 15 months the food inflation low. But this is a curse in a way also, because now with that low base effect, the vegetable prices and the edible oil import prices will go up. And this year, the food inflation is also in danger. It's no fault of government for that matter, but there is very, very big likelihood of food inflation also shooting up in months to come.
So the impact might be all too real in the next 45 to 60 days. Mr. Garg, many thanks for taking out the time and speaking to us
Thank
here
you.
on News 9. Mithali Nikore, founder and chief economist, Nikore Associates, with us on the broadcast as well. Mithali, many thanks for patiently waiting over there. I was just told that you've entered the discussion. I'm sure you've heard what Mr. Garg was talking about here as well. And we often hear that wholesale inflation will eventually reach the retail inflation as well. In practical terms, help the layman out there. What products, what sectors could become noticeably expensive first? What should the common man out there be ready for? And when the government was kind of dropping these kind of hints, has it been able to soften the blow at large as well?
So thanks a lot for including me in the discussion. And I think, we all look up to when, Professor Garg, I now call him Professor because, he's all our teacher. But, on a very serious note, what we are facing today is an unprecedented rise in the wholesale price index in a way that we actually haven't seen in several quarters. Because when you look at the data, in March, it was actually a rise of only 2%, and in January, 1.8%. And we've suddenly gone, to an 8% increase in the WPI. So it is showing you what the impact of these increased, actually, it's not only oil prices, because you see, retail oil prices haven't gone up. The government is absorbing that impact even today. So what this is actually showing is the impact of the commercial LPG increase. When the commercial LPG went up from, around 900 rupees to then 3,600 rupees per cylinder, this is the impact, because obviously it's a nearly 4 times price increase per cylinder. And that's what we're seeing in the, 4 times price increase in the WPI. It's almost 1 for 1. So this, in my view, is calling for, and I think that's what Professor Garg was also saying, and a real strategy of diversification of industrial fuels. We have to keep that focus. Right? Let's not talk about, so I know you talked about 4 or 5 points at what people should do. Those points was to stock up. But, if we advise people to stock up, we might actually see situations of, panic buying. And at this point in time, I just want to say fuel costs are still being kept constant, and fuel costs only account for 6% of the consumer price inflation index, while they account for nearly 8% of the WPI. So therefore, the weight of the fuel price in the overall consumer inflation is far lower than in the wholesale price inflation. So at this point in time, I would advise consumers not to worry, not to engage in any sort of panic buying, because the retail price of fuel, which goes into calculating your, consumer price inflation, which is what you and I experience, that has been completely protected and buffered by the government through the excise tax reduction. So at this point in time, my suggestion would be, don't worry. Yes, I would definitely agree with number 3, make your money work harder. That's very important. But it is important that, we look at alternatives for industrial fuels. That's where the real problem is coming.
That's where the focus should be. That's what you're talking about. And, I'm going to come back to, I'm going to ask you for your, 5 top tips and techniques for the, common man out there. Before that, Mithali, I remember you've been very vocal about the small businesses, about the MSMEs as well. How badly do you think margins are going to get squeezed for the small businesses as factory gate inflation goes up?
With MSMEs, the first thing is the most unexpected impact, that the labor is going back. We are seeing that return migration of labor, and MSMEs are not able to find labor in the kind of numbers that they used to have. They are operating with skeletal staff. They are operating at, say, a 30% or a 40% level of what they were doing maybe in January or February, because the labor itself has had to go back, to their villages because of the simple fact that LPG was not available. And right now, they are not entirely sure whether when they come back, will they get it or not. The second issue, of course, is the industrial fuel and the fact that commercial LPG has become so expensive, almost not available. So for MSMEs, the margins are razor thin, and I can also see many of them are starting to go into losses.
All right, Mithali, how long, of course, Professor Garg said that it's going to be about 45 to 60 days before we actually see the impact in the markets. How long do you think it's going to take for factory level inflation to reach consumers' monthly budgets and, start feeding into them? And your practical financial steps that the middle class and the households can take right now to protect themselves? You've already spoken about no panic buying and the focus being on the industrial fuel, but what else?
So I think that we have a window of about a month before this starts hitting our pockets, right? We have that window. And in this window, there's a lot that can be done. We can see that the government can really come in on a war footing, because this is a war after all, and bring in more and more financing for adoption of electric vehicles, bring in more and more financing for adoption of renewable energy solutions. We have distributed power plant technology which is available. We have dimethyl ether which is available, which can be used as an industrial fuel. We have more ethanol blending that, those decisions can be taken. So I think that now the time has come to stop thinking and start doing. We need to start seeing some of these radical changes being approved, at least on a pilot basis, tried out in the next week or two. And in the next 1 month, we should start seeing them being rolled out across the country. This is what we need government support for. Of course, we also need government support for working capital for MSMEs and to, help them tide over this period, at least for the next 6 to 8 months. But we really need the government to now focus on these structural reforms, because these structural reforms is what will save us from that WPI converting into a higher CPI.
Before we let you go, Mithali, we do need to focus on the interest rates as well. The RBI has tried to balance growth and the inflation quite carefully as well. Do you think this data now reduces the chances of rate cuts or cheaper loans anytime soon?
Yeah, cheaper loans are, I think, out of the question.
Okay.
But, I think the fear I have is if the interest rates are increased and if monetary solutions are applied to what are completely structural economic problems, we are going to be in a mess, because even the cost of borrowing is going to then increase for the government, right? And the government has to spend at this time. There's no option but to incur that fiscal deficit. So it is also a double-edged sword to increase the interest rate.
All right. Wholesale inflation may still sound like an far removed from daily life, but we've had Professor Garg and Mithali, and history also shows that it rarely stays at the factory gate for a very long time. The real question now is whether this is a temporary oil shock or the beginning of another pressure wave on the Indian household budget. But there is a silver lining and a lot of hope, as per what Mithali has just told us. Mithali, many thanks for speaking to us yet again on News9 and putting these numbers into perspective as well. And with that, we've come to the end of this edition of In Your Interest. We're going to catch you again tomorrow. Many thanks for watching.
मंडे आइएगा सब पेपर्स के साथ।